I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight on a Thursday evening. I'm going to explain the program and then we're just going to get right into it. I am Chief Bankert of the York City Police Department. Tonight is a GVI public presentation of the Group Violence Initiative that we've had for the last 3 years. We're going to start with a video that we showed earlier today at our Group Violence Initiative training for the officers. It's an internal training that we conducted all day long, and it involved the entire York City Police Department. Then we're going to we'll talk about a common critique, something that the public had said that we had not done well in, which is basically publicizing what we actually do with GVI. Then we'll show another video. After that video, then I will continue with the presentation by giving some basic outline of what we did, what we're doing, and what we are going to continue to do with GVI. At the conclusion of my presentation, I'm going to introduce you to Mayor Michael Helfrich of the City of York. He's going to give you some examples of what we've done over the last couple of years, and then he is going to introduce David Kennedy, the director of the National Network for Safe Communities, based out of John Jay College, and the author of Don't Shoot. He's the originator of GVI, and which was originally called Ceasefire. So earlier today, we had training of 90% of our police officers, which was a task all in itself to get them in the same room. We spent all day speaking about it. We had, I started the day explaining the basic details of it because almost 30% of our police officers have less than 3 years on it because we're a young department. I felt that was also needed because they heard of what GVI is, they participated in GVI details, but they don't fully understand what it was. So I felt it was important as a mass to get everybody on the same page. So we did that today, and I started that. Captain Butler then spoke about specifics and how we implemented it, where we're going, and some of the successes. In the afternoon, we were blessed by having Carl Jacobson from New Haven, Connecticut Police Department, who is a friend of ours. We've been out to his police department, and he's taught us how to do shooting reviews and help us improve the GVI, and he closed it for the day. So the video that we showed here, beginning of yesterday, was a video that we initially started after the loss of Alex Sable, who died in line of duty exactly 1 year today. We didn't get it done in time because of all the issues with the memorial. So I just changed the concept of it and just made it a video based on some of our experiences. And it was based out of Paul Harvey, if you guys remember Paul Harvey, a statement that he made. And if you didn't know, Paul Harvey's father was a police officer and killed in the line of duty in the early 20th century.
Policeman. A policeman is a composite of what all men are, I guess, a mingling of saint and sinner, dust and deity. What that really means is that they are exceptional, they are unusual, they are not commonplace. Buried under the froth is the fact, and the fact is that less than 0.5% of policemen misfit that uniform, and that is a better average than you find among clergymen. What is a policeman? He of all men is at once the most needed and the most wanted, a strangely nameless creature who is served to his face and pig or worse behind his back. He must be such a diplomat that he can settle differences between individuals so that each will think he won, but if a policeman is neat, he's conceited. If he's careless, he's a bum. If he's pleasant, he's a flirt. If he's not, he's a grouch. He must make instant decisions which would require months for a lawyer, but if he hurries, he's careless. If he's deliberate, he's lazy. He must be first to an accident, infallible with a diagnosis. He must be able to start breathing, stop bleeding, tie splints, and above all, be sure the victim goes home without a limp. The police officer must know every gun, draw on the run, and hit where it doesn't hurt. He must be able to whip 2 men twice his size and half his age without damaging his uniform and without being brutal. If you hit him, he's a coward. If he hits you, he's a bully. The policeman from a single human hair must be able to describe the crime, the weapon, the criminal, and tell you where the criminal is hiding, but if he catches the criminal, he's lucky. If he doesn't, he's a dunce. He runs files and writes reports until his eyes ache to build a case against some felon who will get dealed out by a shameless Seamus. The policeman must be a minister, a social worker, a diplomat, a tough guy, and a gentleman. And of course he'll have to be a genius because he'll have to feed a family on a policeman's salary.
So we implemented the Group Violence Initiative 3 years ago, and a consistent critique that we have received was that we didn't explain what it was to the public well. That critique was proven over the last couple of years. Whenever I would ask, I would see somebody new in the community, a new public official, I would do another interview, and the same question is, what is GVI? Dozens of interviews, dozens of speaking events about the Group Violence Initiative, and I was getting the exact same question. So I asked one of our partners, the Department of Justice, and specifically the U.S. Attorney's Office out of the Middle District of Pennsylvania, if they would create a video for me that gave us gave everybody a basic outline of what it was, and to personalize it to the York City Police Department. So tonight we're going to premiere that video, and that is going to be the start-off point to my presentation. We went 50 days with 50 shootings. So we had nearly one shooting every single day for 50 days.
So we had a rash of violence here in York City, of gun violence, and that kind of sparked to say, what are we going to do different? We can't do the same things again and again.
We knew that we had to come together as a team, and we had to do whatever we could to keep people from dying.
So within 6 months, we raised the money to start the initiative, and we started our training. A group member will shoot at another person, shoot at another group member, a different group member. That will then create an atmosphere that second group member now feels that they need to support their reputation in the street, and then they have to go and shoot somebody else. We want to disrupt that. We don't have any indication that we're going to be able to disrupt that single shooting where it's an emotional reaction to someone being in their own group, or some sort of perceived disrespect from one group to another. That happens too quickly for us to respond to. But the Group Violence Initiative allows us to disrupt the second, third, and other subsequent shootings, which in theory then reduces our total shootings. So the Group Violence Initiative deals with adults who are shot by somebody who is involved within a group. So we had a shootout, and then one person died, and one of the shooters we believed was living at that address. And it definitely was a GMI, group member involved shooting, so we had several details set out. Started blanketing the neighborhood with the information that this guy in this house shot this guy on this date, and we think he's still coming back here. So what it ended up doing was putting so much pressure on the family that the grandmother had him turn himself in as long as we stopped knocking on her door. So that pressure alone, it wasn't aggressive policing, it was very precision-based, and we were able to get the public to help us out with the capture of the homicide suspect. But when we're responsive in a timely manner and in an effective manner, that second, third shooting doesn't occur. That's where we see our reductions. It's the disruption. The Group Violence Initiative has two parts to it. It's a law enforcement portion and a community and outreach. And they're supposed to work hand in hand through one person as that project manager.
The difficulty was finding out who the leaders in the community were, who were the movers and the shakers that we needed to talk to, and then to spend significant time with each of them. It ended up primarily being clergy, the folks who have most influence in the community, as well as some of the funders in the community and care providers.
When we first started coming together, we were kind of concerned because we really wasn't getting the traction. But the more the community and the partners with the law enforcement and all those other agencies, Department of Justice and others came on board, and we began to coalesce around the message, we began to see an impact in this community.
Because this initiative was about gun violence. It wasn't about other things, it's about gun violence. So it was focused, that we could keep people moving in a direction that they understood that we wanted to stop the violence in the city.
The chief and his office have walked with us where we engage the community, and we're building those relationships before something happens. So on the West End, we know a lot of families, we know a lot of individuals by name. And then when they see the chief out walking with us and officers supporting that endeavor on a weekly basis, it gives us credibility in that community that we're here. And when things do happen, that allowing us to be the liaison between the police department and the crimes. Sometimes they don't go directly to the police, but they will come to some community individuals that they feel comfortable with and allow us to be that liaison between the community and the police department, and it's been helpful.
Here was an opportunity for us to do something, to actually do something, other than just creating more people in prison. I mean, we can't just keep locking people up and throwing away the key. There has to be something that we can do to bring these people back into society.
We have grasped this, and we have conducted a wholesale change in how we do business with regard to shootings and crimes of gun violence in the community.
And our specific role is really to be the hammer, to be the group that comes in, takes on the most serious cases involving violent crime and pursues those cases to the ends of justice, which normally means a conviction and a very substantial sentence in federal prison.
The violence in this community has to come to an end.
The probation department is a partner in the GVI project. We use the authority of the court to compel individuals to come in for call-ins, custom call-ins. I have designated 2 probation officers just to this project, and those officers supervise the individuals that are identified through the GVI initiative.
We call in about 8 to 12 people that are influential within a group. They may not be a shooter, they may be a shooter, but they are influential within that group. They may hang out with that group, they associate with that group, and they are compelled then to come into that meeting for one reason or another.
They're there to receive a message that the community is tired of the violence. Guns bring police, violence brings police. We want you safe, alive, and out of jail. So that's very much a one-way conversation.
At the same time we're saying that, the other hand is reaching out saying, we're here to help. Anything you need. They hand a card out at the call-in and with a number on it and say, anything you need, you call this number. And when they say anything you need, they mean anything you need. The stories are amazing.
If you need anything, this phone will be answered 24/7.
And through that initiative, we've been able to provide an individual with barbering equipment so he could go back to school. I believe he's since paid our initiative back. We were able to get a mattress for someone who needed that. We were able to pay for a vet bill for someone's dog who was injured. So I think those small acts, while they don't cost a lot, have a huge impact on the community. It shows that we're there for you. We're not just there to arrest you when you're not doing well or when you're not doing things right. We're there to also provide you a helping hand up when you need it.
And it's very short term. It's not long term. We're not just giving out things just to give them out. But the issue there is that we have everything there that you need. There are no excuses now for you not to help us to avoid this retaliation.
You're part of this community. We want to see you do well here. We want to see you make something of your life, and that's why everybody is here tonight.
GVI was an opportunity to offer people hope. And even though I know that it's not something that's going to happen overnight, it was just the idea that we were willing to say, listen, we don't want you locked up in jail either. We don't want the violence, and we do want you to be successful. So we want to help. So for me, it was mind-blowing. Like finally someone sees what I see, that locking people up is not the solution.
It's okay to do something different. Do something different. Go to school.
Through some other initiatives that we have going on in the community, our Re-Entry Coalition, through the work of the GVI Governance Council, we've been able to form partnerships with employers who are willing to offer employment to individuals with felony convictions. And that's so incredibly vital because that conviction does hold people up from getting jobs, and not just like a job at McDonald's, but a job that really can be life-sustaining for someone, that could be a career, that could be more than just minimum wage.
Through the collaborative efforts of everyone involved with GVI, so many other initiatives have begun. We have a situation now where just even a few years ago, we had groups of people in the law enforcement community that weren't speaking just because they never crossed paths. Now, because of GVI, we have a seamless flow of information through many different facets of the law enforcement community.
The probation department, while we worked with the York City Police Department, we probably didn't have the best relationship. So through this initiative, we have solidified a solid relationship of trust and communication, and that kind of spreads out. We've strengthened our partnerships, and every relationship that we build ripples out into the community and strengthens all of us.
Why I'm a believer of the Group Violence Initiative is I've seen internally, now from the Detective Bureau Commander and now as the Chief of Police, the efficiency now that my officers work. So I see more work getting done in the same amount of time. And now, because we've incorporated those Group Violence Initiative ideals into the police department to where they are now more effective.
And I can't put a price tag on having the community trust as a pastor, as a preacher, and as a community leader. It has paid dividends on being able to be at the table and giving a voice to those who might not otherwise have a voice.
To be involved in something that also involves that reach out to the community and those efforts to help and to build something instead of just tearing down. We're going to tear down criminal conspiracies. That's what happened with the Southside Gang. They tore down that group, and as it should be. That has to happen too, but it's wonderful when the building up can happen at the same time.
GVI is investing in the people's lives, and that's what makes the difference.
There's no way for me to tell you how many shootings we avoided. There just is no way for me to do that. I firmly believe that our efforts have stopped some shootings to have occurred and have stopped some people from dying.
So the vision, we're going to start right from the beginning. The vision of the York City Police Department and the Group Violence Initiative is that through an umbrella of proven law enforcement strategies and equal support of community outreach efforts that we can reduce gun violence. So I describe it as an umbrella because there are many different strategies that we use in criminal justice and police departments to deter, to address issues of any type of crime. And we don't discard one for the other. One may work for a time, and then another may need to be replaced. The same with support and outreach. An effort may be working for a time, but then you need to change with the times. This is social science. So you have to understand that at some point your efforts may not exactly work as well as they did in the beginning. But the point is that that umbrella is then controlled by the group, the project manager, on an equal basis. There is equal amount of law enforcement as there is support and outreach, and that is the responsibility of the project manager. Our total mission is then to facilitate these law enforcement strategies that equally engage police and the community toward a common goal of reducing gun-related violence. And I've been saying for the last year and a half that if we want any type of reduction of crime, you have to support the police. We are not able to stop all crime all the time, and we need your support. But I'm not just saying that the support is that, okay, I support you. I need you to actually do something and help. But I should not expect you to know what to do. So our role there is to facilitate that to the community. And that's what GVI does. That's what the national network gave us as a format, in order to have a format for the community to actually help us reduce the gun violence and for us all to work in the same direction. So our goals are fairly obvious. It's the reduction of gun violence, but we evaluate it in two different ways, a qualitative and a quantitative way. Quantitative way is the numbers. And as I said in the video, there's no way for me to explain to you or predict to you how many shootings we had actually predicted. There are some ways, and I'm going to show you in a minute how we try to show our impact through numbers and statistics, but that is only one way that we evaluate the success of GVI. The other way is a qualitative. The qualitative efforts that we have are the relationships. There's half the people in here tonight I've had outstanding relationships because of GVI. That is the first thing that the National Network tells us to do, is to establish those networks, and they're both in the law enforcement side and the community and outreach side. And then once you make those relationships, then the police department's responsibility is to guide and facilitate your willingness to help us in the reduction of gun violence. So when we look back over the last 3 years and we say, how are we doing? I get that question a lot. How are we doing? And everyone wants to see the numbers. It's only half the story. The relationships that we've had, that we've created through GVI, there is no way we have been able to make that. We are swimming in the same direction. We see each other and we have ideas. Ideas are going back and forth with the project manager, and those relationships have helped us beyond just our group violence initiative. When there's a misunderstanding of an incident, they have no hesitation to call me and say, hey Chief, what's going on? But they have access to me now. They're able to get an answer. And then in turn, I ask them to help me with possibly the same issue. I have that same phone number that I can call. And instead of trying to make a new relationship every time there's an issue with the police department, I've already made those relationships because GVI has allowed us or has guided us to that point. So the history of GVI for us started in 2015 and 16. In December of 2015, and the Southside case concluded in November of 2015, where we got convictions on racketeering, federal racketeering charges on the Southside gang in November on 12 defendants. Those 12 defendants then were found guilty in November, and in December and into January, December of 2015 into January of 2016, we had 50 shootings in 50 days. During that time, we were completely overwhelmed. There was retaliatory shootings because one group member shoots another group member, and that group member feels they needed to retaliate, and it was just completely out of control. We were literally working 24 hours a day to investigate the shootings, and we were completely overwhelmed and not effective. We were completely taken aback, and we decided that we're not going to put ourselves in that position anymore. We raised the money to contract the National Network for GVI, and in June of 2016, we initiated our training with our governance committee, which comprises of leadership, the top leadership of law enforcement and in the community to go and learn about GVI. And then we had to establish those relationships, like I said, both with law enforcement and the community. So the quantitative versions here, this is one of the ways that we try to track our successes here. And we have to understand that, a reasonable expectation has to be put on these statistics. What do you really think would be a success? The idea that we will reduce crime every consecutive year in a total slant is not the experience of the other jurisdictions that have implemented the National Network, and Carl Jacobson from New Haven actually had reiterated that this afternoon with the training for the police officers. So you'll see there at the end, and then 2016 is our base year. That was all pre-GVI. 2017 was the first year that we had full implementation from January 1 to December 31st, and we saw a 50% reduction in gun violence. Very encouraging. And you see there in 2018, we almost went back to the 2016 numbers, and then this year we look like we're to be on pace. And that number, that graph represents those persons struck by gunfire. The other one is the group member involved shooting incidents. So just because there's a shooting does not mean it is GVI. It has to have either the victim or the suspect or some sort of component of a member of a specific group that we're aware of, and then we count those. So you'll see there at the end, we don't have a baseline for 2016 because we didn't collect that information. That's another component that the national network allowed us to do. It guided us in a way to evaluate our own successes and our own failures so that we could respond back to them. So the conclusions, the data conclusions that we come from those two graphs is that we had a reduction in persons struck in 2017, which is our first full implementation year of 50%. In 2018, it rose nearly to our base level of 2016. So when you see these things, the process is, what did we do right and what did we do wrong? We do it when we're successful, and we do it when we're not so successful. So 2018 was disappointing. So we said, okay, what happened in 2018? 2018 was disappointing because we were very enthusiastic about 2017, right? 50% reduction. Several things happened in 2018 that we had a very large amount of transitions within the police department. I became the chief, new captain, 5 of my lieutenants were promoted, 8 sergeants were promoted, and we hired 15 police officers. So we had a total of about 30% of the police department in absolutely brand new positions, and the GVI efforts, although we put them out, were not as effective or efficient as they were in 2017, and it showed. So the issue with that is, I say that my point is that when we know that we are responding appropriately towards our own tenets and format of GVI, gun violence is reduction. When we know we are not doing it effectively, it rises. So I'm going to reiterate what Lieutenant Jacobson has said earlier today, is that it works. We show that it works. It's just a matter of being consistent enough to provide those services of GVI. So it's another way we look at that through that second chart is the group member involved. The group member involved in 2017, 50% of all the shootings in 2017 were group member involved. However, even though we had an increase in 2018, our group member involved shooting was only 33%. And we're seeing that same number so far this year, so we're very optimistic with that. So law enforcement theories. This is how we respond. And it's not a cookie-cutter response to any specific group or any specific shooting. They are general responses. But specific details. So the first one is the chronic offender, and the chronic offender then says that those people that are committing the majority of crimes. If you have 10 shootings, it's likely that maybe only 2 or maybe 3 people are actually committing those shootings. You're trying to target or trying to concentrate on those individuals that are shooting multiple times. They're shooting multiple times because it's retaliatory. It's retaliatory, and it's part of the groups. That's why we concentrate on the groups. And like we said in the beginning, if you're at a point to where you're a chronic offender, you have completely opted out of the value of human life. You have completely said, I do not have any value of human life, and you will just disregard any type of help from us. And I'll explain that in a minute with support and outreach. And therefore, that's when we start doing only law enforcement. But you have to get to that point. If you go to a call-in, if you go to a custom notification, we help you with a job, and we help you with this, and we talk to you, and you call us, and we have this conversation, and you continue to do the shootings, there's nothing else for us to do but law enforcement. Because you have told us that you have no value of human life, nor do you have any intention of obeying our laws and avoiding chaos. But it goes right towards the precision policing. The precision policing concept is directly related to chronic offenders in that we don't do blanketing details or operations anymore. The idea and what we've learned from this is that in any neighborhood, right, you say, well, we have a lot of crime in this block or 2 blocks or a 3-block area, and say, well, that's a bad neighborhood. What we found through our support and outreach and some of the walks that we do with the street soldiers with Pastor Walthour is that 98% of everybody in that block are good people. It's not everybody on that block. It's just those very few. So instead of putting blanketing operations into an area where you're getting that guy who's going to work, you're stopping that guy for a traffic citation, going to work, or somebody that is a law-abiding, and you're stopping them because there's crime in that neighborhood. That's not as effective as when we use the intelligence from our support and outreach, intelligence from our law enforcement partners, and say, it's these 5 people that are likely to cause the next retaliatory shooting. So we concentrate on them. And we concentrate on them by doing probation visits when we do some traffic violations, gun and drug interdictions, but that is usually only after that we do the support and outreach, as we have decided that, or we have concluded that the law enforcement or GVI has to be a balance of the two. So Lieutenant Wentz is our group violence initiative. You can go back one. Is our lead in our group in GVI, and when Jim Tyson, our project manager, sees that we're doing this only law enforcement, he has to pull him back. So we have that balance. The decentralization issue we talked about, we have it's a quicker response. So the immediacy issue in law enforcement or for GVI is that it has to be immediate. There has to be immediacy, and we define immediacy as 24 hours. And the decentralization, meaning you don't have to call me to do an operation. You don't have to call one of the captains or even the lieutenants. We train them today. That was part of the issue today. We train them today to know when and where to do these operations. We train them to make those decisions so that no matter when an issue comes up, they are able to use that. Deterrence theory means that if you have if you're considered to have a competent guardianship, that it is a direct deterrence of gun violence. Our shooting review is an intelligence meeting. That is an action meeting. We do it every week. We conduct it every week. We have all of our law enforcement partners participate, and we review all the shootings for that week, and then we do something about it. We don't just talk about it. We don't just share information. All of that is good, but you could know everything and then you don't do nothing. It doesn't affect anything. You have to do something with it. So I call that an intelligence action meeting, and that has been very effective to allow us to continue with the precision policing. And the overall concept that we give when we go out and we do our walks and talks, and every time we do a detail, is that guns bring police and shootings bring police. On our support and outreach, we talk about things like call-in. We saw that in the video where we get members of groups coming in, and they are influentials. Those influentials are those who can influence those who may be shooting. And we believe that at times that the shooters actually don't want to shoot. They don't want to do it, but they feel they need to either maintain or retain some level of respect within that group. And if you put yourself in their perspective, sometimes all they have is that group. So if you take away that respect from them, you've literally taken away everything. So even though that they may not feel that they want to, shoot somebody, they feel compelled to do so. So we bring them in and we ask them as a force multiplier to say, look, we don't want you to shoot, but when you do, guns bring police and shootings bring police, and we're going to affect it for the whole group. If you don't want the police there, then tell them not to shoot. What the idea is, what the thought process is where the influentials are, give them an out. It gives them an out. Don't shoot because I have a warrant. The police are going to knock on my door because I'm part of your group. Don't go retaliate on this incident because I'm on probation and I don't like my probation officer, right? So that is the concept of the call-in. Custom notification is a similar idea with the call-in, but it's very personal, and that's where we usually are able to say, what do you need for us to get buy-in from you? What do you need from us right now that'll get you over the hump? What do you need right now for you to believe in us to say to those who may shoot to get them to stop, or at least give them an out to not stop, or to stop with the retaliatory shootings? Little big things are the issues where we have, and it will give some examples, the mayor will give you some examples of how the little things really mean a lot. when we get that buy-in, we get that respect, and it's all about building the relationships. We have the community relationships, the law enforcement relationships, and we strengthen our relationships then with the community, those involved in these incidents. Safe and live and out of prison is a constant theme through our custom notifications, and what we do then is we strengthen. What that does is it strengthens the community capacity to actually prevent crime. They can actually do something about it. This is my point, where the law enforcement responsibility is to facilitate that opportunity for the community to help. We're not just saying, oh, well, you need to help us by telling everything so we can solve it. We are there to facilitate the opportunity for you to actually speak and convince and directly involve yourself in the reduction of our gun violence. And there is a give and take. We learn a lot from those interactions. We have a community policing response to victims of violence, where the theory of victimology says that 90% of all of our efforts in the criminal justice system is based upon goes to the offenders, where the victims are the ones who are left less whole and are not that are overlooked. The mayor and I have gone to many a crime scene and immediately contacted the victims. We refer to them often as secondary victims, where they're not the ones that were struck by a bullet, but they're still affected by it, and sometimes it can be financial. And it's a 5-minute conversation. We're here for you. Tell us what we can help you with. We give you a phone number for 24/7. That phone is answered by Jim Tyson, the project manager, or someone from his support and outreach team. And then we let them decide whether they want us to let them help them. We follow up with them and we ask them what they need. Sometimes it is literally zero, except guidance on what to do next. Sometimes it's no money at all. Sometimes it's, what do I do when I have a family member die and you call a funeral service? Sometimes it's transportation. Sometimes we've had it with hotels, with family coming in from out of town. So sometimes that's the little big things. The disruption is what we do with both the community side, or the support and outreach side, and the law enforcement side. It's disruption, disruption, disruption. I just constantly say that in the police department. They're a little tired of it, but I'm going to continue to do it. And it's both the support and outreach and law enforcement. If we can disrupt a retaliatory shooting enough days through our support and outreach and through our precision policing, that retaliatory shooting doesn't occur. If we can reduce the second, third, and subsequent shooting of an initial event, we can drastically reduce our gun violence. That is the bottom line of what we do. That is the bottom line. So whether we disrupt it by giving them help, whether we disrupt it by giving them guidance, or whether we disrupt them by using precision policing, the idea is to disrupt the idea of retaliatory shooting so that we can have a total reduction of our gun violence. Many report being forced into the violence. I spoke about that. And the response to the shootings of retaliatory is usually an external and internal issue where you feel like you are compelled to actually do it. They feel like they really don't feel like they have a choice. Because when all you have is respect and that is taken away from you, you become desperate. That's really all you have is your own respect. That serves as a motivator. So as a result of this, through the results of self-reliance, the idea is it's just this one big circle. That the withdrawal from the legal system, meaning that you are ignoring the idea that I should not be shooting, right? I should not be shooting somebody else, or I don't trust the police to make the arrest, or nor do I care if they make the arrest. I'm the one that's supposed to take vengeance. It elicits a reciprocal violence. It was called, as noted from the national network, and it just spirals out of control. And that's what happened in the 50 days and 50 shootings. It just spiraled out of control. And there was no interruption. There was no disruption to that. There was no disruption to it, so it just continued. So one of the ways that we look at our successes is how many days, or what is the specific information of the next shooting, and that did we accurately or did we appropriately disrupt the retaliatory shooting. And that, although we can't prove negatives, we consider that a total win. So the Mayor Michael Helfrich of the City of York, is going to come up, and he is going to give some of his, enlighten us on some of the examples that we've had, some of the successes that we've had over the last year and a half.
Thank you, Chief. I wanted to start off by thanking former Mayor Bracy and Chief Cayley for having the vision to begin this program. While I learned about it back in 2012, shortly after reading the book Don't Shoot, I certainly was not in position to get this program going in the city, and they had the vision to get it going. And I am certainly indebted to them, and I think York City is indebted to them for that. I cannot overstate the change that I have seen between community members, people that before really felt completely abandoned by the city, by the government, seeing the police as the enemy. I was not, I can only speak from the last year and a half, but Chief Bankert confirms that we have seen so much more information come in. We have seen so many more people actually come to us and say, here's my family member. My family member was involved in this. And I'll give just one example. I got a call from a grandmother who we had spoken with, and she helped us. She was afraid of one of two things, of either somebody on the street shooting her grandson or a mistake happening with the police department, where the police department, we see this stuff across the country. Luckily, we've been very good here in York, but you see the examples on TV, and people think about that. And this grandmother, because of building of trust, actually helped us apprehend her son her grandson in a very safe way. We had another person who was a career criminal. And it's interesting because when you actually talk to folks, you can, first of all, you get a little reflective and you look at why you've made your own decisions over time. But you also then can see why they made their own decisions over time. When in second grade, they were basically ignored and education was never a priority. They weren't sent to school. So at 7 years old, they're spending their time on the streets. Well, heck yeah, they ended up in the criminal justice system for the rest of their lives. And when I first met this particular gentleman, he was extremely, extremely angry. His nephew had just been killed. He seemed to hate everything having to do with the city. And I ended up taking the family out to lunch. And not long after that, a few months after that, his son was involved in an incident. And this guy, who months before had never wanted anything to do with the police, he actually brought his son directly to the police station and said, this is what you have to do. You've got to go and do your time and face the justice system. That was a complete turnaround for that person. And he took a lot of flack for it. He took flack in his community. Can you imagine that? To turn your own son in? But he did it because of relationships that we built, and he knew that it was the better way. Some of the amazing things on here, you heard April, Bill at Barclay talk about the one gentleman who got barber tools. So we do all these things. When I first came in, we were just working with I call them folks that are at risk of violence. These are the people whose names always seem to show up. That doesn't mean they were the ones pulling the trigger or anything. It's just they always seem to be either a witness, on the scene, something. They're just always in the wrong space. And those are the folks that we target probably the most to try and get them going onto the right path. Once, if you've committed a murder and we've got you for murder, guess what? We've got you for murder. You got to go. But if you're somebody, and when you come back out, then hopefully we're working together to build up the reentry side too. But those folks that just seem to always be around the wrong place, they're the ones that we talk to, and this was kind of the origin of the program here in York, that we talk to them, they bring them to the call-in, and they say, what do you need? Can we send you to school? We actually have money right now to send people to trade school. We have money, as April had said, to buy the gentleman barber tools, because he had learned the skills of barbering. He wanted to go straight. Last I heard, he was then, was he a manager up at ES3? So he went on to build his life back up in a legal way. But the thing that I am most proud of so far, and maybe even most proud of as mayor, is what we have done with the community police response for the victims of violence. These are the folks that for years, and I say this because they've expressed it to me, they thought they were forgotten, completely forgotten. The police show up, they give all their time, that's good to be down on the crime scene, and then they're off chasing the criminals. But again, I try not to put anybody down, I'm only repeating what I'm told, but in the past, we were not reaching out to the victims, particularly the way that it's being done now. It is absolutely amazing. I'm going to start with last week, and then I'm going to work back through some examples. But last week we had a young man killed, and Chief Bankert and I were on the scene. And, when you're in that space, I think maybe only the pastors in the room might, or people that have been close to death somehow, know what this is like to be there with people during their most traumatic experience in their life. Their kid is laying there dead. Their brother, sister, boyfriend, and you can't really get to the parents very much because they're completely hysterical at the time usually. But just on the scene, I had an aunt come up to me from the victim, and I was able to give her one of the handy cards that I always keep in my pocket because I never know what's going to happen. I've always got these cards right here, and it's really simple. It just says Community Police Response to the Victims of Violence and resource number on the other side. That's it. And I say, let me know what you need. I can't promise you anything, but let me know what you need so I can figure out what we can do. And she said right away, we're going to need some help with the funeral. He had no life insurance. That's what she said to me. And so I rapidly, I think she had already been in touch with Jim before I even reached out on my own, because she had posted the thing to do is a GoFundMe page. You get all these GoFundMe pages every time another young man dies around here. But Jim Tyson, Pastor Tyson, our GVI manager, had already been able to get $1,000 to the family, was able to hook them up with a funeral home that was going to be reasonable because they were getting quotes of $20,000 for a funeral. And we are still open to helping. We have flown relatives in for funerals. We have, working with LifePath, they've managed to get donations of funeral plots. So we're actually able to give folks funeral plots, the things, trying to think back because I can't think of one off the top of my head. I'm going to say person of means that has been murdered in York that has $50,000 in the bank and can afford a funeral. You know, this is happening to within our most impoverished neighborhoods, mostly to our most impoverished individuals. So, you know, and people come back to me then and thank me, and it's a whole new world for them. They're miserable, they're sad because this thing has happened, but they have a completely different view of the government and of the police department. One incident that happened, two middle-aged gentlemen doing nothing but having a barbecue on their front porch got shot while somebody was trying to shoot at one of York's most wanted, I think I can safely say, who had ducked in and out of the way. So these two innocent folks had gotten shot. A woman's car had gotten the windshield shot out. Somebody nodding their head lives around the corner from them, so she knows exactly who I'm talking about. We were able to come in. She couldn't go to work. I talked to her, and the neighbor too. I talked to their bosses on the phone. I went up. I was on the scene right while it was happening. I walked up. I called the bosses to explain to them, hey, they're not going to make it into work, because they felt like they needed somebody with credibility to be making this call. Then we were able to work and get the money, $400 and some to fix the windshield, because the insurance company wouldn't cover bullet holes through the windshield. We were able to do that. We were able to help fix a fence in the backyard because somebody running from the police had knocked down their fence, and it was now being used kind of as a passageway through the backyards for people doing things they weren't supposed to do. Then the one individual was shot in such a way that I'm not even sure if he's even back to work now. He was shot in the leg, but kind of in the groin area, real dangerous shot. And his mom owned the house, but he did the mortgage payments. They were going to lose the house. So we were able to come up with 3-4 months of mortgage payments. I say all these things, it's really the generosity of people so far that have been donating through LifePath or through other means to give us this ability. We are working on some grants, but when I left that house at the time of the shooting, young woman from what the police say as known individuals. So this is kind of a known family. This address is known. She came over to me and she gave me a bunch of information. And again, I can't give you the name, but she said, if you wouldn't have gone up there and talked to Mrs. So-and-so, I wouldn't have talked to you. I mean, this is the rebuilding of relationships that have been broken for decades, if not centuries. This is the effect of GVI in the community. One last story I'm going to tell you. I could go on and on. But the chief said, we can't tell you what shootings we've stopped. And this is one, I know I'm going out on a limb, but I will do it. This is one that I believe we stopped a murder because of GVI. Again, it's hard to tell what to speak in the negatives, what have you stopped? But after the last call-in, one of the young individuals saw that his basketball coach had been there. He called his basketball coach and he said, "Coach, I'm on the run right now. I left my mom's house. 2 of my friends have been shot in the past year, and now they're coming for me. I've got one of 2 choices. The one choice I know how to do. I can go get my gun or a gun, and he left his mom's house to protect his mom and his family. So he said, I'm not going to stay around here, but I can go and find the people that are coming for me. I know how to do that, and I can do it, but I don't want to do it. He said, I need to get out of town. So then that basketball coach called me. I called Pastor Tyson, and within hours, at least within 24 hours, I believe it was, we were able to get money for the bus tickets. We were able to get gift cards to Walmart, gift cards to Giant, so the individual had food and anything he needed to on his way out of town. And something was going to go down. We either stopped him from committing another murder or somebody from murdering him or wounding him if the aim wasn't good enough. But I really, we stopped a shooting. I like to think, and that's a weird way to say it, but I like to think we stopped a murder that night and with that action. And so I just can't say how grateful I am for David Kennedy and your work. And I'll say one more thing before I bring you up here, and that is my friend John Naylor, who lives out on the east side, when he read the book Don't Shoot, he came over to me, he gave me the book, and we got on eBay, and sorry, David, but we found every $3 copy, every $5 copy. We found every cheap copy we could find. And I think we bought like 33 copies, and we passed them out to everybody we thought that we could influence at the time. And I am more committed to this than I have ever been. You have an evangelist here in York, and I'm very thankful and very honored to introduce David Kennedy, the director of the National Network for Safe Communities at John Jay College. Thank you, David.
Good evening. Who came here thinking it was Art Garfunkel? This is an amazing room, and that's not the only reason I'm glad to be here. I'm really glad to be here. So particularly this evening to Mayor Helfrich and Chief Bankert, who are most immediately responsible for my being here. But as you're already hearing, or perhaps already knew, this kind of work requires a large and dedicated partnership. And what you find about the people who are drawn to it, they may start for professional reasons or because somebody told them to, but this work changes people, and the people who get it are profoundly changed by it. And so I'd like the folks who are working on GVI in York to stand up for a minute. And I don't know if my colleague Jefferson stood up. Jefferson is also part of the national network and is one of those guiding hands in this work. So I want to start with something that we're kind of taking for granted. It is built into the conversation that, or it's not a conversation yet, we will move to conversation, but it's built into what you've been hearing and into a conversation I hope we will move to, which is that you are being told that the city of York knows how to keep people from killing each other. and from shooting each other. And I want to pause and recognize how extraordinary that is. I have been doing this work for nearly 35 years. And I started because other kinds of work got me into some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the country back at the beginning of the crack epidemic, and the violence and the fear and the chaos and what became the toxic responses of the criminal justice system, which led to what we all now recognize as over-policing and under-protection and mass incarceration. All of that was so extraordinarily awful that I have never been able to look away from it. The worst of that is the killing and the dying. And one step down from that is the young men on canes and walkers and colostomy bags and RIP written on the sidewalks and the little shrines to the dead that dot the neighborhoods. I hate the shrines, not because of the people who build them or the respect and the grief that they represent. I hate them because we got used to it. And now I hate the GoFundMe pages for the same reason. And at that time, there was nothing that anybody knew how to do that would change that. My first policing field work in the United States was in 1985 in Los Angeles with the LAPD. And LAPD's express formal doctrine at the time was that they did not consider themselves accountable for homicide. They considered themselves accountable for burglaries and robberies and thefts of motor vehicles and that kind of thing, because a good department could patrol and respond to calls and do investigations and aspire to change those things. But they didn't think they could do that for people killing each other. It was momentary, you couldn't predict it, it was over before you knew it, you couldn't respond to the scene and change it. And even in Southern California, most killers are not serial killers. And so if you solve the case and lock somebody up, you really haven't done anything about the next one. And that was how police felt, it was how community folks felt. And people tried lots of things. If you talk to folks and said, what should we do about the killing? You get 100 different opinions, but none of them worked. And we lived with the violence and with the extraordinary sense of frustration and if you've been close to this, you know what I'm talking about. It is unspeakable. And that's not true anymore. So last night, I sat in my home and read a report that was released just this last week about Oakland, California's version of GVI. They still call it ceasefire in Oakland. And Oakland, for years, as long as I've been at this, has been one of the American poster children for unrelenting, unaddressable, serious violent crimes. Consistently been one of the 10 most dangerous cities in the country. And the report says that over the last 5 years, a GVI partnership like York's, working in Oakland, has reduced homicides and shootings by 50%, arrests by 60%. Police use of force are dramatically down, complaints against the police are dramatically down, and the homicide clearance rate, and again, if you know about this, you clear homicides because people tell you who did it. That's how you clear homicides. You may prove it with forensics and all that stuff, but you clear it because the community tells you what happened. So it is a marker of community trust. It is a marker of the legitimacy of the police. And the homicide clearance rate over those 5 years in Oakland has gone from 29% to 71%. We know how to do this. And it's not perfect. There is nothing that cures this problem. And as the chief said, everybody who does this work knows that there are moments when it gets away from us. We know now to stay the course, to stick with it, because we know that we can get it back. And that was never, ever true before. So I want to talk about why that's true and what we have learned about the violence on the ground and what it tells us that we should do about it, and not only what to do about the violence, but what we know about the violence tells us about the larger community. So I want to take some time and talk about that. The reason we can be now genuinely effective is because there is now a clear understanding, a solid empirical scientific fact, which is that there are very, very few high-risk people in any community. We are used to language that says things like dangerous neighborhoods, and I'm going to come back to that. There are no dangerous neighborhoods. There are no dangerous communities. Where we have homicide and gun violence, it is always, and this is now 30 years of formal research, as well as if you talk to people in the affected community, they will tell you this because they know it, and the rest of us weren't listening for a long time. In the most dangerous community, the violence is driven by very, very small numbers of exceptional high-risk people. They are overwhelmingly at risk for being killed and hurt, and then they are at high risk for hurting other folks. The math is amazing. So these folks, and again, you've heard it from the chief, are overwhelmingly in groups of various kinds. This is not really about individuals acting out their own considered judgment. It is about groups of young men, and we missed this for a long time because we looked for gangs, and gangs are structure and order and discipline and all that kind of thing. Most of these groups are not that. They're small, they're fluid, they don't really have formal leadership. Again, you've heard this already. Most of the violence is not ordered by leadership. It's not about protecting markets. It's respect and disrespect and girls and retaliation and vendetta. But it's vested in groups, which changes things. I'll talk more about that. But the groups are obvious. If you talk to the frontline cops, if you talk to people in the community, they know who they are, which means that it's actually relatively easy to do an audit, identify them, figure out how many people are in them. And the mathematical fact has emerged is that in any place with these troubles, those groups will typically represent right around 0.5% of the city. And they will be connected with 50 to 80% of all the homicide and gun violence. That's the problem. It is not the city, it is not the community, it is not a gender, it is not an age group. It's a very small number of people. The day before yesterday, I spent my day with a guy named Devone Bogan. And Devone comes out of Richmond, California. He's now recognized as one of the most insightful and capable people about working with these high-risk guys. And when he got started in Richmond, Richmond's a city of about 100,000 people. He went to the law enforcement and said, let's do this audit, let's identify these high-risk folks. And when they were done with that, they had a list of 270 people out of a city of 100,000. That's right about 0.3%. And then he took that list to folks who really knew the community and really knew the streets, their outreach workers. And the outreach workers went through it. And they keyed out the guys that they knew were really driving things. 28 people. And those 28 people, as Devon went on with his work in Richmond, turned out to be associated with 70% of the gun crime in Richmond, California. That's 0.03% of the city of Richmond. We're working, Jefferson and my team and I were working in Malmö, Sweden. And those of you who've been reading can't say reading the newspapers anymore, I guess, but who've been paying attention to the world, know that Sweden has been making international headlines because of spikes of violence in Malmö and other major Swedish cities. And we did exactly the same thing. We got with people who knew what was going on. It turns out, as always, it is group involved. The people close to the action know the groups and the people. And in Malmö, Sweden, which is a city of over 400,000 people, the groups driving the violence that is tearing the city apart and making international headlines represent 0.6% of the population of Malmö, Sweden. This is how it works. And because that fact is a fact, because the violence is driven by and suffered by identifiable, very small numbers of people, it means that we can do a kind of work that nobody ever imagined being able to do. And I want to talk about what that work can look like. But everything that has turned out to transform crime prevention around serious violence, transform violence prevention, vectors off this reality on the ground. That means that we should stop thinking about the affected communities in the way that we think about them. And I want to step to one side for a minute. I will come back to how one does serious violence prevention. But the mayor said this violence is happening to people in our most disadvantaged communities. He's maybe too polite to say what I'm about to say, but I'm not. It's happening to black folks, right? It just is, and brown folks, right? It is not happening to white folks. White folks don't live like this. And the school shootings and the spree shootings and that kind of thing have given white folks a tiny taste of what black and brown people have been living with for a very, very long time. And outsiders have been looking at these black and brown communities for a very long time and saying those are dangerous neighborhoods. And then you get the sort of next round, which is complete loss of moral value, absent fathers. Liberals like to say we've got to get to the boys before they're 8 because after that it's too late, we've lost them. Guns have become the preferred method of dispute resolution, right? This is what we say about those communities. None of that's true, right? It is scientifically, empirically not true. Because in these communities, all of the damage that has been done to them over history and recently, the racism, the abuse under color of law, the redlining, the the unfair housing practices, the bad schools, the bad health care, the food deserts, the lack of employment, arresting all the fathers and sending them to prison so they'll never be able to make their life work. Despite everything that we have done to them, they still govern themselves and raise their kids and deal with each other as neighbors in a way that means that almost none of their young men will in fact grow up to be in this high-risk pool. They're not bad places. They're not dangerous neighborhoods. They're good places with some difficulties. And I've been involved recently in a Justice Department project that's been able to go to the most dangerous places within these communities, because the violence clusters by place just like it clusters by high-risk people. And if you go to the folks who live on those most active blocks and interview them, they overwhelmingly respect the law. They think their neighbors should respect the law. They hate the violence. They want to do crime prevention. They don't trust the cops. That's another issue. But they are not different from everybody else. And what we now know about the dynamics of violence should fundamentally change the way we think about and engage with these communities. And let me just pause for a second. Does that make sense to people? Okay. And one of the things it means right away, and you've heard it from the chief already, it means that all the fashionable ideas that took over policing for a while, zero tolerance and all that sort of thing, they're both fundamentally damaging and disrespectful, because when you put hands on everybody in a community, they don't trust you anymore. And when all the men have criminal records, they can't get good jobs and take care of their families. But it's just bad work, right? If almost nobody is doing this stuff, then touching everybody else is pointless. And again, we're way too late figuring that out. So, what ought we to do about that small number of really high-risk folks? So the first thing we need to do is keep them alive. And we tend to think about offenders and victims as separate categories, but in this world, they're not. It's the same folks. And one of the absolute implications of the fact of this concentration and the overlap of offending and victimization is that you cannot bring your numbers down. You cannot do violence prevention without making these high-risk guys safe. It can't be done. They're the ones who are getting killed and getting hurt. If we don't make them safe, we don't make progress. That's the way it works. And what one discovers when one works with these really high-risk guys is, and you've heard it already, they don't like their life. They don't like being at risk. Every gang member loves his mother and his little brothers and sisters. Nobody wants to walk out the front door and be afraid of being shot. They may not want to work 9 to 5, but nobody likes the violence. And the chief is right. There are a few people out there who do not fit that description, and they are crazy, scary, dangerous, but there just aren't very many of them. When Devon Bogan set up with his 28 guys in Richmond, none of them ever committed another violent crime. All right? So we need to make them safe. And the most fundamental way we make them safe is to stop this retaliatory dynamic of group-on-group violence. So in order to do that, it has turned out that there's I was going to say a recipe, and then that sounded kind of condescending, but it's a recipe, right? There is an understanding of how to do this. So one needs to identify the groups and law enforcement and communities know the groups. You need to identify the people in the groups, and a little bit of assiduous work will identify the people in the groups. We need to talk to them. There isn't any way of changing this dynamic without being in sustained relationships with these groups and the people in them. It is not a deal. It is not a get out of jail free card. It is not illicit. But you can't raise your own kids without talking to them, right? We've got to talk to them. And that does not mean we can't have standards and obey the law, but we need to be in sustained relationships. And that is the call-ins and the custom notifications and the CPRVV visits and the things that you've been hearing about. And then within that sustained engagement, there turn out to be three things that we can organize and focus and make part of the fabric of the way we address this issue. And these are no different in York than they were in Boston over 20 years ago, or that they are in Oakland now. Everybody who's doing this does this basic stuff. And it's organized differently in different places. It looks different. This is not a program. It's a way of doing the work. But the work has these fundamentals. And the first of the operational fundamentals is what we call the moral voice of the community. It's not law enforcement. It's not social services. That's the way we all think of how to do this, right? We lock somebody up, we get them a job, right? We're good at thinking that way. We are not good at thinking about what scholars call informal social control. So formal social control is the gun and the badge and the courts, and we get that. Informal social control is what happens in the lives of individuals and families and communities that are about individual and family and community standards and expectations. And everybody, when we think about violence, thinks about the power of the gun and the badge. So I have a little thing I like to do. Audience participation moment. Raise your hand if when you were growing up you were afraid of the cops. Thanks. Raise your hand if when you were growing up you were afraid of your mother. Yeah. Exactly, yep. And this is how the world really works. When I said these are not dangerous communities, they have real problems and real issues, that's right. And we think about crime prevention, we think about how we're gonna respond to those issues, and that's when the professionals come in. What we need to realize is what I stepped aside and what I've become so passionate about. Even in the most dangerous places, there aren't very many dangerous people and there's not actually that much violent crime. Most of the work of crime prevention is not done by the government. It's done by the community, by raising their kids right and working with their neighbors and going to church, right? That's how real communities function, which is why, like the doctors, we should begin by doing no harm. We should not, in order to prevent what's left over, do damage in the community that makes it harder for communities to be communities. But in any community, when you look at the small population of really high-risk people, there are people they respect. They don't probably respect me or the mayor, but they respect their mothers. They respect the guys that they looked up to when they were coming up. They respect their coaches. They respect their best teacher, whoever it is. Everybody respects somebody. And when those people get together and sit with the guys at high risk and say to them, we love you, but this has to stop. The community can't stand this anymore. My son was you before what he was doing got him killed. And I'm telling you, my family will never, ever be the same. And there's too much of this in our community, and you do not want to do that to your own mother. and you do not want to do it to some other son's mother. This has to stop. And people care about that. And they care when somebody they looked up to when they were coming up says, I really believed in my street family. I knew they would always be with us. And that's when the feds came calling, I kept my mouth shut while all my boys flipped on me and gave me up. And that's why I did 25 years Fed time. And when you get locked up, how long you think it's going to take for one of your friends to sleep with your girlfriend? And I was in one of these rooms, and one of the guys who'd been called in raised his hand, and he said, 3 days, and it was my cousin. Right? People know this. And when it's said out loud in the right way, by the right people, to the right people, it is tremendously powerful. So, moral voice of the community. The second operational piece is what we now call outreach and support. It's what Devon Bogan is so good at. It's what it takes to keep those 27 guys and those 280 guys alive and free and unhurt, not hurting anybody else, not locked up, not part of the cycle that keeps this going. And the old ideas about this were everybody needs a job, everybody needs to go back to school. And we all tried that for decades, and it does not work. It is a miserable failure. And what we finally had to realize was going to somebody who is 18, 19, 23 years old, soaked in PTSD because of all the violence that he's seen, dropped out of school, can't read, doesn't have a place to live, doesn't have an ID, can't get insurance on his car, can't go out of the house because he's got warrants hanging over him, and if he gets stopped, he's getting locked up again. And there's no point in going back to work because he's got child support judgments and he won't keep a dollar that he earns. Saying to that person, we'll do a needs assessment and get you into a jobs training program, it's insulting. And those things are really good for lots of people, but they are not good at the beginning for the most high-risk guys. So they need what you've already heard about and what the mayor's identified, what we call the big small stuff. They need to be safe. If somebody's trying to kill them, we need to get them out of the line of fire. Let's do something about their warrants. If they're going to go to the corner because their little brother's hungry and they need money, let's put food on the table. Let's stabilize their lives in situations. And it may not be about becoming middle class. This is about keeping people alive, keeping them from hurting anybody else, and keeping them from being locked up. And for a lot of these folks, as limited as that is, getting there consistently is a huge success. So, moral voice of the community, support and outreach, and then we do not know so far how to do this effectively at a city scale without the role and presence of law enforcement. I don't know if the chief would say this in just the way that I'm going to, but it was pretty close. We want as little law enforcement as we know how to do in order to produce public safety. Every time somebody gets locked up, every time they come back out on the street and they have to say yes when they're on an employment form and the question is, do you have a drug arrest? Have you been convicted of a felony? Every time we tear them away from their families, every time a kid sees their fathers get hauled off by guys in uniform, that does harm. We want as little of that as we can. So we need to do it right, and as you've heard from the chief, we want it to be surgical and precise. For the group dynamics, it mostly needs to be focused on the groups. This is one of the big insights that comes with understanding the dynamics of the violence. If you've got two groups and they're retaliating, which, as you've heard, is just a fundamental thing that drives what's going on, and law enforcement does a great job, and the last shooter on each side, you clear those cases, they get locked up. On the street, you've got two groups and they've got a vendetta. There's going to be the next shooting and the shooting after that. Dealing with individuals doesn't reach the group dynamic. And we suddenly understand why so much we've tried to do about this doesn't work, both on the law enforcement and on the social service side. Overwhelmingly, we deal with individuals. We try to get them for the shooting, we try to get them a job, but it's individuals, and the violence is carried by the groups. Again, pause. Does that make sense? Nobody's saying no, so I'll continue. So law enforcement has needed to figure out how to get the groups to know that if there's homicide and shooting, there will be a response the group cares about. And we want that to be as minimal as possible. So the basic move on this has been to say in the call-ins, we want you to listen to the community, we want you to take the offer of help. Understand that when you leave here, we are going to be paying special, consistent attention to the most violent group in the city. Whatever group is the most violent, they're going to understand that there is a cost associated with that. And when you all leave here, the first group that kills somebody is going to get that kind of attention. So you and the guys you run with do not want to be in the most violent group in York, and you don't want to be in the next group in York that kills somebody. And there's a little bit of sort of penny ante strategy in here. If they believe that, then you've shut everything down. And it doesn't work like that. It's never that perfect. But it works. It's a way of deterring what would otherwise go on. And then when you have to do it, you don't need huge sanctions. We heard from the U.S. attorney up here, and there will be usually that kind of federal attention to any city with a big violence problem. But if you're wandering around thinking about doing something like this, the likelihood that you will end up getting federal attention and getting a federal sentence is vanishingly small and unfortunately really unpredictable. You won't know what's coming. What mostly works is much lower level stuff that you can do really quickly. So if a group has singled itself out for this kind of attention, they don't all need to go to prison forever, and we don't want to do that. You want something, and the something can be they've got outstanding warrants, you go serve them. They're on probation. You don't even have to send them back to jail or prison. We've got probation officers who say, your group shot somebody, you are on probation. Therefore, rather than coming to my office once a month, you are going to come to my office 3 days a week for 2 hours, and you will sit in a chair. You have to do that, you're under court supervision. You are messing with their lives, they hate it. In Philadelphia, the teams learned that a lot of what they called gang members were stealing their electricity and their cable TV. And if their group shot somebody, you call the utilities, they go out, they look at the poles, they unhook the pirated connections, and suddenly you're sitting in the dark reading comic books by candlelight. It's not about enormous sanctions. It's about doing something rapidly, predictably, consistently, and having it across the group rather than on individuals. And this doesn't have to be perfect either. It just has to be better than what we're doing now. And it turns out that when you do that, and you do better than we're doing now, you can get what York got the first year they did this, 50% reductions in shootings. You can get what Oakland's got. You can get what Detroit's got. We're working in Detroit. Detroit last year had its safest year in decades, I think maybe since they started keeping homicide records. Jefferson and his team are in a small town up the Hudson from New York called Newburgh, which is not a city that anybody thinks about when they think about the most dangerous places in America. It's only about 30,000 people. Pound for pound, it is consistently one of the 10 most dangerous places in the country. And the first year that they started this, they had a 70% reduction in what they call bullet-to-body shootings, people being hurt by gunfire. The next year, it went down another 70%. I began this by saying we know how to do this. And I heard the chief out front just before we were coming in being asked questions about the increase that the city had last calendar year. And what he said, paraphrasing, was we veered off the tracks, we understand what happened, we know what we need to do, we got things back on track, and things are looking really good right now. So for the first time in history, we know how to make this stuff better. And we know that it's not perfect and that there will be moments that it gets away from us. And we know then how to figure out what's gone wrong and bring things back. We are no longer in the days that I grew up with when something wrong happened. Everybody was floating ideas about what we were going to do about this. We're in a panic. Summer's coming. What are we going to do about this? We don't have to do this anymore. We know how to do this work. And in my office, we have a saying, which is, we like to work with people who like to work. And we've been delighted to be involved in York because York has decided it's going to do this and do it right. And we're honored to be part of that.
So we'd be happy to take a few questions now. I'll try to repeat the question, or whoever's on the mic can repeat the question so the folks out in video land there can also hear what the questions are. I do want to say one thing that, David, while you were speaking, a family member from the young man that was murdered last week texted me to invite me to the funeral. That's the kind of stuff that we're doing. So, folks have some questions? Somebody's got something. Come on. Yes, Patricia.
Hi, Patricia Ma. And I'm just wondering if there are opportunities for the community in general to do any type of volunteer work with this group?
Are there opportunities for community members to do volunteer work with the group? Yes.
This is where part of 2018, where again we weren't as responsive to what we knew would work, as David had mentioned. We were pretty good with groups, so we had good relationships with groups. We were able to maintain our relationship with groups, but we were not able to expand that relationship to individuals. And what we found out, what I have found out in 2018, was that you can, the more we talked about GVI, the more we talked about us having solutions and a pathway to it, the more I would get individuals coming up and say, hey Troy, how can I help? What can I do? And I didn't have anything for them, individual to do.
But now we do.
So we were concentrating on the groups, and I wasn't expecting that influx of individuals. So yes, we have. I can give you a card here today. We profess that through. We profess that in these settings, and then our project manager Jim Tyson will get in contact with you. I had one just the other day. Again, one of our persons that we had, Fred Walker, sitting here, just called me the other day and said he was part of the Chicago Baptist Church, which was one of the groups that are very close to us. He says, I want to do more. I don't know how to do more. We have that method now to do that, and that's through Jim Tice.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also the call-in.
Sorry?
You can come to the call-in as well.
So yes, members of the public are invited to the call-ins. We do go through Pastor Jim, though, to come to the call-in. So, Pastor, is it appropriate for me to share, because there are a lot of folks that are going to see this, is it appropriate for me to share the same GVI number, or what's the best way to get in touch with you?
I would use mine.
Use the email, okay, and that's jtyson@yorkcity.org?
Yep, this phone number on that card there.
Okay, great. So this is Pastor Jim Tyson, and his email is jtyson@yorkcity.org, and his cell number is 717-841-5515, and he's the project manager for GVI. Anyone else?
Yeah, I got a question. I mean,
Yes,
hold
sir.
up. First of all, sorry, I had to go to work, so I got it. But I respect New York City Police and what y'all are doing here. And I heard you say something about precision policing. And I've been in New York for about 15 years, and I've had both sides of the track. But what I know is that when certain areas in New York City are not bad, they know where they are. They know where they are. So therefore, what they do is they flood the areas, right? And they somewhat profile, I want to say. You understand? So if you go to an area and you're policing an area, I'm from Baltimore City originally. So if you go to an area and you're policing an area, and you stop every individual that comes through that area, that creates a friction between the police and the individuals. So if you know the individuals that are in that area, and you go after those, and you just stay in the area.
So the question, I can't share it all, can't say exactly what you said, but we are, the police chief has mentioned precision policing.
Right.
And your question is, and I'm going to kind of change a little bit, you feel that there is still blanket policing going on in neighborhoods as opposed to precision policing?
Exactly.
Okay.
And then
So
what he was
the
saying,
chief did say that we were working towards precision policing and going after the individuals, but we have someone with experience that was saying that he doesn't feel we're there yet. Can you give us something?
There's two issues, two concepts that you're referring to as zero tolerance or total enforcement. It's kind of the same concepts, where a police department will say, this neighborhood is off the hook. It is, the crime's crazy, we have to do something, and that's where you get the stop and frisk type of ideas. Maybe that's something more that's familiar, that was on the news. The New York City Police Department has abandoned zero tolerance, and we have abandoned all ideas of total enforcement because it does not work, and it affects those who are not committing the crimes. We know, that David said it, and we have experienced it, that it's a very small portion of those communities. When I go out, and my officers go out, and go to the communities that, if you look at a map, has all the crime in it, right? You look at a map, but that doesn't tell you, it just tells you the numbers. It tells you the numbers, but the vast majority of those people in that neighborhood, in that block, are not committing crime. It's just that small number. So we have abandoned the zero tolerance and the total enforcement methods. We call it blanketing too, a lot of different names for it. So we do the precision policing. However, what you do see at times is that we will send 2, 3, 4, sometimes a half dozen of officers, and you'll see them do a probation visit, for example. What I've asked them to do a probation visit is the precision policing. They are going after those people that we have identified in groups that are most susceptible to either being a victim or being a shooter. And I said, when you're going to go to a home, and you're going to go down the block to another home of a person that we know, on your way there, I want you to engage the people that are outside, and I want you to tell them why you're there. So we engage everybody
that we see, but we aren't enforcing in everything that we do. So probation, you have in one block, we'll do a probation visit, and along the block, someone's outside, and we'll say, hi, do you know why we're out here today? And we tell you exactly what we're there for. Part of the issue in the culture of policing over the years is that we didn't share the information. We wanted to keep everything to ourselves. Some things we do have to keep to ourselves because if we can't prove it, we don't put people's names out. It's not responsible. But many times, you want to know what's exactly what we're doing. So I'm asking those probation officers and those officers in that probation, for example, as they go by, they say hi and say, do you know why we're here? And we'll tell you why we're here. Because we're at that house. That house is part of a group. We had a shooting. We believe that if we, and this is where people were saying here, we offered help to that person. We think that possibly that there may be a retaliatory shooting, and we're trying to stop that retaliatory shooting. Guns bring police, shootings bring police. We want you safe, alive, and out of prison. We do the same thing when we do what we call walk-in talks. So we'll have an officer or two, and we'll have them talk to anybody who's willing to talk to us. So in that sense, we call them touches. We talk to everybody, but we have abandoned zero tolerance and total enforcement theories of law enforcement in our responses.
Okay.
So Jefferson and I are from New York City, and New York is responsible for driving national and international practice in this area, and taught the world that the way you address serious violent crime is by the kind of high activity, stop and frisk, flooding the zone kind of tactics that you were talking about, and that are so awfully destructive. And once those things got established, part of the issue blocking reform was people's terror that if you stop doing that, the streets are going to be running red with blood. And that's what the administration in New York told people. This stuff took hold all over the country. And once it was established, it worked in New York, we're going to do it here. And this was solved politically in New York 6 years ago now. The last but one mayoral election turned on this issue that the gentleman raised. Because not only were the affected communities not having it anymore, the better off communities finally kind of cottoned on to what was going on. There was a political revolt against this practice. And Bill de Blasio was elected. He changed the administration at the PD. And 6 years later, stops, was just a briefing on the stops in New York are down 94%. And last year was the safest year in New York City since the city started keeping records. So it is not true that if you stop occupying black and brown neighborhoods that the streets will be running red with blood. When you stop doing that, you stop pissing off everybody who lives there, and you have a chance of getting their respect back. And when Commissioner O'Neill, who runs NYPD these days, talks about the strategy and culture of NYPD, in the first sentence that comes out of his mouth is, we practice precision policing.
Yeah, I was going to make one first. And the gentleman left, unfortunately, but as mayor, I get, I don't know if it's 50-50, but half the people are telling me to flood the place with police, and the other half are telling me asking me why are the police always here. So it's very difficult. I see Councilman Buckingham here. I don't know if Councilwoman Walker is here, but they were on my block the other day. And for those that don't know, I live in a little bit of a rough block. A 17-year-old was killed on the sidewalk right by where we were talking to a gentleman that came up, and he's an African-American gentleman, probably about 30 years old. He was telling us everything that we needed to do to stop crime. And his words were, you need the cops out here all the time. So it's not just kind of top down or rich people thinking that they know best for the neighborhoods, for the poorer neighborhoods. Again, I say that as a guy who lives in the neighborhood. So it's a very mix of opinions in all the economic strata and races. I just get it from all sides. But I am also convinced that the precision, and building relationships is what we must do. And from what I heard, and we'll talk about it, but we can always do better. We're doing good, but we can always do better. So, okay, all right. Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah. I'm from out of the area. If we were to use 2018 statistics for the city, how many were killed in shootings?
2018 statistics, 12. 12 were.
Yeah, total of.
I'm sorry, I didn't repeat that. This gentleman from out of town, are you from York County or are you just visiting?
No, I'm from out of state.
Oh, okay, gentleman from out of state just asked how many of the homicides were shootings last year?
Yeah, how many were killed last year in shootings?
Okay, how many were killed by shootings in the city? And I think the chief is also going to differentiate between group member involved shootings and things like domestics and things like that.
In 2018, we had 14 homicide incidents with 15 victims. So there was one double shooting. So of those 15 homicide victims, the 14 incidents, 12 of those incidents were from gunfire.
Okay, and how many shootings?
We had 61 shootings total.
Okay, and how many of those shootings, percentage-wise, would you say were gang-related?
33%.
And
Group related. Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Drug-related?
Drug related? We don't keep those specific statistics. The reality is, though, if you start associating every crime with drugs, you'll find a way to associate it. So it's either in a large way or a small way, and we found that. And it's almost the same concept of, well, we need more cops, we need less cops, or either that, so we're wrong either way, right? The complaint. So if you look at deep enough into each crime that results in violence, you will find a drug connection. So you can make, it's a fallacy to then say, well, if we resolve all drugs, we will resolve all violence. The idea is that the drug issue is throughout our culture, and that no matter how deep you look into it, it will some way be associated. It's to what degree of its activity to the violence. So if it's a direct result, then we start looking at that as an impact, as far as an uptick or downtick.
But it's fair to say that the majority of the shootings are rooted.
I would not say rooted.
No, in drugs?
No, absolutely not.
Not? Okay.
No, I think it was expressed. Yeah, please.
What you find is, so as the chief said, there's overwhelmingly some sort of connection to drugs, whether that's use or the trade. What we all thought for a long time was that it was the drugs that drove the violence. Right. And there are two ways that can happen. One is pharmacological, right? It makes people behave badly and hurt people. That's a little bit true for stimulants like meth and cocaine, but not that much. It's really not true for opioids, because opioids slow people down and make them violent. The other conviction for a really long time was about markets. So it's an illegal enterprise. Somebody steals your stuff, you can't go to the police, you got to take care of it yourself, or somebody's after your corner or something like that. And that made all kinds of sense. It just turns out not to be right. What overwhelmingly drives the violence are these interpersonal issues around respect and disrespect and back and forth and all the things that we've been talking about. What you find a lot of the time is that you only really get that culture in groups and networks that are also making money illegally. So the connection to the drugs and the other stuff is overwhelmingly there, as the chief said. It turns out not to be right that it's the market dynamics that drive the violence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, again, I can understand that, whether somebody's under the influence of drugs and shooting versus the distribution and the control side. One last question, and it is, again, related. When I think of gangs, I think of distribution, I think, whether they're using or not using, but it's, money's involved, as well as respect. 2018, how many in the city died because of the overdose?
Can I answer that?
Sure, ma'am.
I would say that there are many, I'm the coroner, by the way.
Let me repeat the question. I don't know if I understand. I'm sorry, Pam. So you're asking how many in 2018 had died in the city of York, and probably the county, Pam has that as well, for overdoses?
Yeah, I don't have it split up city per county, but it's usually about 60% die in the rural and suburban areas of drug overdoses and about 40% in the city. And actually the majority of those are white Caucasians who come into the city to purchase their drugs. We have a very small minority of minorities who die from drug overdoses in this county.
And what was the count for the
numbers?
Hold on, let me repeat that because there's folks out there. What our coroner Pam had said was that it's approximately 60% of overdose deaths are in the county, 40% in the city, but predominantly those in the city are Caucasians that have come into the city. I'm going to throw out there a combination of to get drugs and do drugs in the city, or also in some of the houses that they come into. But the overdose problem in York County is predominantly a Caucasian problem, while the gun violence problem is predominantly African American and Latino shooters and victims.
And the numbers associated with those percentages, if we were to look at 12, that's the city, right? The number of, again, drug overdoses related to the city. Numbers, not percentages.
Ma'am,
I don't have that right off the top of my head,
I
so
don't know how many.
have well over.
So, in New York right now, I think the last finding was that in Staten Island, for example, which is a largely white community that's been hit really hard by the opioid epidemic, I believe I'm remembering, so I know that the opioid death count, the overdose death count is way higher than the homicide count. My recollection is that it's about 5 to 1 right now. I'm not sure about that. I'm absolutely
Overdose
to homicide, yes.
Okay, all right.
I want to follow up also a little bit, and I'm going to say, we had, I believe, and I'm not the prosecutor or the chief, so I'm just going to say what I hear because I hear the street talk. But at least 4 of the 12 victims were somehow involved in a potential robbery of a drug dealer. Or someone with drugs. Is that drug related? I don't think so. I think that's a robbery. It had nothing to do with the drugs. The same people could have been robbing them for $100. So that's robbery related. When I think of drug related, I think you're talking about territory, as David said, talking about territory. I can think of one that might have. Again, I hear a lot of stuff
So I can think of one that might have had to do with somebody trying to take somebody else out because it was gang related. And that could have put them in a position of power. But almost everything is, you know, you got my ex-girlfriend pregnant. Now somebody's dead at a family event, you know. Yeah, it's that kind of stuff. It is disrespect, it is over women, it is over feelings. Very little of it has anything to do with what a lot of people traditionally say, that it's drug related or even gang related. That's why they don't use the word gang, because it's little groups of people, and those groups change just like cliques in school. Sometimes it's not, in most cases, it's not like you're tattooed for life anymore among these groups. It's people switching up from month to month or year to year. I know we're kind of probably getting to our time, but there are a couple more questions. Pastor Walter.
Good evening, everyone. Before I ask my question, I want to make sure I didn't see your hand go up.
Yeah, I thought there was another hand over here. Did you have one?
Remark that I had heard the word drugs all evening and asked about it, but you just answered the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. We're one of the board members that work with Chief and the Mayor at Shallow Baptist Church. We're part of the Community Street Soldiers, and we've been walking the streets. We started up last week. And some of the things that we're hearing that we try to address is social media. A lot of the beef is now connected to social media, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, other outlets. What advice, Dr. Kennedy, could you give us as having boots on the ground to trying to intervene and interject the message of GVI to the community when there's ongoing issues by the use of social media?
So the first thing I would really, really strongly encourage you to do is not to worry about it too much. I'm sorry, the question was these group dynamics and the retaliation and such that we've been talking about are now playing out on social media. They're being driven by social media, and so what ought we to do? Is that close enough?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to get more practical in a minute, but honestly, the first thing I'm saying to everybody about this is don't panic. And let's remember what we know about the trajectory of serious violence in the country, which is that overall it's way down. So we always focus on the work that needs to be done, and that's exactly right. We should be like doctors. We should never be satisfied. But it's also the case that the homicide count in the country and the rates are down dramatically from where they were at their recent worst in the early 90s. And there are more cities like New York and LA and Detroit and New York and all these others that keep on doing better and better and better year after year than there are ones that aren't. And what's absolutely the case is that as social media has become much more a part of everybody's life, including young folks and including at-risk young folks, the violence has gotten better, right? That's just a fact. So there's this feeling in a lot of places that social media is making everything worse, and the facts don't actually support that. What is happening, I think, is that it's changing the way things happen. So I'm old, right? And when I got into this, people were communicating back and forth between groups with paint on walls graffiti. And then it moved into the rap tapes, and everybody was insulting each other back and forth on the rap tapes, and the little studios where you could do that. And then the audio turned to video, and the videotapes were driving everything. And now it's moved into social media. And that's real, right? I'm not saying it's not real. But in most places, as that has happened, things have continued to get better. So this notion that a lot of us are carrying around that social media is blowing up the violence is just not right, right? And so that's why I begin by saying don't panic. I think it gives us opportunities because I still remember when the only way you could tell what was going on out there was to be out there and have your eyes on the corners and be physically present and know people by name and have that kind of seasoning. Now you can sit at your desk and watch what's going on, right, if you know how to look. So we ought to have much better insight into what's happening at a lower cost and more professionally than it was when you had to be 15 years on the job to know what was going on. And then what we're seeing is that there are ways of, when you track what's going on, to do the kind of intervention that you've been hearing about. You can do the custom notifications, you can do the home visits, you can find the guy's grandmother, you can send a credible messenger out to the kid and say, take that post down, it's gonna get somebody killed. And I can steer you to some people who've been operationalizing all of that because that's very real. And I think it's got a lot of potential. But I go back to where I started, which is, it's not as bad as it seems.
Everybody still looks attentive. It is 10 after 9. One more question? Well, thank you all for attending, and thank you for learning more about what we are trying to do, and hopefully you can take this information back and share it with others. I think the mystery of GVI is still out there, no matter whether it's folks that are supporting us, or people on the streets. I run into young folks. Actually, I didn't tell you this, I ran into the brother of one of our most wanted, and he's, you can have brothers that one of them's going wrong and the other one, and he's doing right. Isn't that the oldest story in the world, right? Pastor? But he asked me, he was like, explain this to me, because I heard, you guys are coming down on my brother, you're coming down on my brother. And I said, no, we brought your brother in to explain to him all the opportunities that we had for him. Here's all the things that we offered him, but he wouldn't accept it. And so we had to do what we had to do, and while we were talking, he found out also that his brother had been lying to him about some involvement in things that I knew personally, because I had been talking with this guy. So just by having these little conversations, it spreads the word and the knowledge, and it builds the relationship. So I hope you will continue to help us get the message out there. And contact us if you have any questions. Contact Pastor Jim if you want to participate. And thank you, David Kennedy, for joining us.